I caught up on the Evangelical Theological Society's audio from their meeting a couple weeks ago, the textual criticism area, where they specifically addressed apologetics and textual criticism, which I wish I had known about, but I probably still wouldn't have been able to make it anyways, one way or the other. But obviously very, very interesting to me, especially because they were criticizing some apologetic errors in misuse of scholarly material, which, a lot of things they said was stuff that we've pointed out a number of times here. But they had some great information, some good stuff. But I was very encouraged to basically hear echoes from the leading scholars dealing with advancement in the area of textual criticism, and they're tracking where I'm going in my Ph.D. studies, where my stuff is taking me. And I haven't had any interaction with them. This is just, as I'm looking at what's coming out and looking at the materials, seem to be headed in the right direction. And unfortunately, I'm doing this program right as computerized tools, computerized databases are becoming available, but are not completely available yet. And so for some areas, you simply need to have these very expensive volumes available to you. And a lot of them are not in libraries. They come from overseas and stuff like that. And so we just got one. It's the primary one that I'm going to need, but there are some other ones. So all I'm saying is, if you'd like to, we're going to be talking about text criticism today. It's going to be one of the primary things we're talking about, though it's going to be a long program. We got a lot of things to cover. If that's particularly an area, and I do know a number of you have commented on Twitter and places like that, encouraging me to press forward in that work. We're going to have some needs in that area. So, the travel fund always needs support, and then the ministry resource list as well. So just letting you know about those things. So let's get into it. What's the dress code for this weekend in St. Charles? Today's Kuja and the DL is setting a high standard. Well, thank you very much. I normally do. You should see what... you all jump on me, but you don't see what happens behind this mirror. It's not a mirror, this window. If you saw what Rich just did, you all would feel for me because of what I have to put up with and what I frequently just ignore, because I have to ignore it, because I don't have that many friends left in the world anyways. So I normally wear a kuji for the first night of the conference. It's sort of a tradition that we do, and sometimes on Saturday too. So we're pretty laid back. So we've got the Friday night, the Saturday sessions, and I preach Sunday morning, and then have to catch a flight out. And they canceled the nice flight that I used to get back on, so I'm having to go through Dallas. But anyways, let's get to it. Finally came, since I wasn't at SBL or ETS and all the rest of that stuff. Finally came. It's being called the THGNT, the Tyndale House Greek New Testament. It says Tyndale House Cambridge, produced Tyndale House Cambridge. And it's from Crossway. Crossway does a really good job with stuff. And even the box is nice, I'll have to admit. And it's the New Greek New Testament. And of course it's in they've put it in the nice leatherette binding type thing. Though I'll have to admit, if you leave it sitting for very long, it tends to the cover tends to come up a little bit. But still, it's called the True Tone. I don't think it is really leather, but it feels like it's leather. Anyways, it's not the case bound like you have with the Nessie-Allen. Long time working on this. Boy, what do I say? On a real practical level, it's a nice size, decent font size, and it's very clean in the sense that the Nessie-Allen, especially, the page seems cluttered because of all the textual notes and all the symbols in the text that your eye is sort of eventually gets used to sort of skipping over, not really seeing while you're just trying to read the text. So if you're a person who, for example, has had enough Greek to where you want to use it in the pulpit, if you're a preacher and you want to actually read the text in the pulpit, and you're like some people a little bit too afraid to do that from like an iPad, which is how I do it, though that probably means you're younger, because I got one of those iPad Pros, and it's so huge, it's so massive, that I can make the font size in that thing so big that you can read that Greek from halfway across the room. It's awesome. But this would be a real nice text along those lines, because it's a very, very clean text to read from. So nicely bound, nicely laid out, but extremely idiosyncratic. If you are accustomed to the Nestle-Aland and or the UBS, probably more to the UBS, then what you're used to, you can get to the books of the Bible. You can go through, because this uses standard canonical order. This does not. For some reason, the whole, one of the primary things they're trying to do is to produce an ancient Greek text. And so a couple of things they do is they don't follow the standard order of the books. So you have Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, then you have James. Yeah. You have James, and then 1st, 2nd Peter, and then you've got where Jude is. No, 1st, 2nd Peter, then 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, and then Romans. And then you go through the Pauline stuff, and you get to Hebrews. And that's, Jude's got to be in here someplace. They didn't decanonize Jude. But it's a very different order than what you would be expecting. And so if you're wanting to try to find something, you may end up having to look up front and find it that way. Where did James, Peter, John. Oh, there's Jude. Jude's right after 3rd John. Okay, it's just so small. I skipped it going to Romans. So it's a bit of. I'm sorry. Yeah, poor Jude. Hey, Jude. That's right. And then the introductory material is in the back. So there's a fairly lengthy introduction in the back. They're going to be putting a book out on the methodology they used for making the decisions that they did, as far as the text is concerned. There are textual notes, and but they are very, very minimal at the bottom of the page. And in fact, here's one page. There's no textual notes on it whatsoever. You won't find any page in the Nestle-Aland without text notes at the bottom. I suppose there are a few in the UBS, but again, this is definitely meant to be very clean and readable. From reading, the other thing is going to throw you off if you want to use this, or if you want to, if you're thinking about getting your pastor something for Christmas or something like that. The other thing that's going to throw you off is they also utilize non-standard spelling conventions. So, for example, in the manuscript that I'm focusing upon in my Ph.D. studies, P45, genetai would be spelled gynetai with an epsilon iota. There are a number of interesting, antiquated spelling conventions in the early papyri, or even some of the early uncials. And they follow that. And so book order, spelling conventions, paragraph division stuff, they're trying to follow some of the earliest witnesses in reproducing that, which is interesting if your focus is the earliest text, but could be not disturbing, but distracting if you're just trying to read the text in the pulpit or for things like that. And if your Greek really isn't all that strong, it could totally throw you off because of the nature of that. You do realize that I have the channel up. Yeah, I do have the channel up. People are demonstrating a disinterest in the current topic of discussion because even people in control of the program are having childish conversations about the sweater in the chat channel, and maybe you could take that over. Maybe you could start your own little bunker someplace and have private conversations about that kind of stuff. That's the best place to express childish type things. So you might want to think about doing that. So anyway, so one of the things that struck me is I get the feeling, but I can't document it yet because they said they're going to come out with a book within hopefully a year on all the methodology issues. I mean, all the readings in here have to appear in at least 2 witnesses in the first 5 centuries. Well, okay. That means it's not a primarily Byzantine-oriented text, but all right. But for example, it does read Jesus at Jude 5. Jesus saved a people out of Egypt, which is what's in the Nestle 28th, what's in the ESV, which comes to us partly through the application of the methodology that eventually I want to share with everybody once I understand it well enough to be able to explain it. It is extremely complex and very difficult. It's called CBGM, the coherence-based genealogical method. And part of the problem is the newness of the vocabulary, pre-genealogical coherence and coherence and local stemmata and global stemmata. And it's so new, relatively speaking, that the language is very idiosyncratic and can be very difficult to explain to folks. And one of the things I like doing is making textual critical issues understandable, hopefully accurately, to folks. I'm not like Bart Ehrman, who in our debate insulted the entire audience by basically saying that they weren't smart enough to understand what we were talking about. I don't believe that to be the case, and so we try to do that kind of stuff. So anyway, it seems so you've got the reading in Jude 5, but at John 1:18 they have monogenes huios rather than monogenes theos, and I'm sitting here going, well, I can think of at least 4 incredibly important, the earliest witnesses to the Gospel of John, all long before the 5th century that have the os. So I'll be interested in reading their reasoning as to why they went with huios rather than theos at John 1:18. But of course, there's a note at the bottom of the page. It gives you that information, and so you can make those decisions for yourself. So I definitely think that it's a valuable addition to, and it's interestingly enough, I have not found it electronically. I think they have made the decision to try to make as many of us buy the physical book first before they make it available to Logos and Accordance and Olive Tree and Bible Works and all the rest of the major Bible program providers. But I'm sure it will be eventually made available eventually, like the SBL Greek New Testament was, and things like that. And so you might say, well, did we really need something like this? Well, I think it's extremely encouraging, to be honest with you, listening to these ETS discussions, listening to young men who are becoming scholars in the textual critical field, who've grown up in the Ehrman era, who were in Bible college when Ehrman's books were coming out and things like that. It's the next generation. It was interesting to see how young the voices were. And so it's good to see that there is a healthy interest in these things and a recognition of how important these things really are. And so, yeah, I would encourage that. It's good to be able to compare and contrast them. But I think it's really, really important, and I'm speaking primarily to my fellow believers here, you have to keep something in mind. If you apply, I know I've said this before, I'm going to say it again because it's absolutely necessary that people hear it. If you apply the same methodology of interpretation and hermeneutics to this text as you would to this text, and by the way, the editors of this were saying, hey, we're not trying to replace this. We are simply supplementing it and giving another perspective, another view. This is an S.A. Allen text. This is the Tyndale House Greek New Testament. If you apply the same method of interpretation to this as to this, or to this. This is the New Testament, the original Greek, Byzantine text form. This is the Robinson-Pierpont text. Okay? I'm not sure if it's available. And it's nice, clean text too. It's got nice wide margins, and it's pretty readable as well. I really like the font, by the way, in the Tyndale House. But interpretation of a particular text. I mean, obviously, if you take monogenes huios, the only begotten Son, at John 1:18, you're not going to be making the same applications that you would if you have monogenes theos at John 1:18. But there is no central doctrine of the Christian faith that is dependent upon any single text. And so if you consistently, fairly, honestly, I realize my King James only friends, some of my ecclesiastical text friends can always find a way around this if they want to become imbalanced. But for those of us who don't have that kind of a bias playing in our minds, if you utilize these texts, you're going to come up with the same faith. It's not like, well, one of them has a higher view of Jesus. No, I don't think that's true. Well, one of them has a clearer testimony of the gospel. No, I don't think that's true. And so you have to keep that in mind. One of the things that's been certainly striking me yet again in my studies is in looking at even listening to the ETS audio, which, by the way, if you go to the Evangelical Textual Critical blog, Evangelical Text Criticism blog, there's a link on there to the audio. There's like $4 per audio or something. It's not all that expensive. And if you listen to the presentations, you'll be struck once again by the fact that our New Testament manuscripts are incredibly alike. We tend to talk about the 400,000, 500,000 textual variants. And we emphasize that big number. But when you start breaking those numbers down, what you really discover is that the vast bulk of these manuscripts, throughout the history of the transmission of the text, they're communicating the same thing. there's the idea that, well, you've got these manuscripts and they have a savior named Jesus, and then in these manuscripts they have a savior named somebody else who doesn't. No, completely and totally bogus. It's the same message, the same thing, and it's really a testimony to the bankruptcy of the argumentation that says the New Testament's been corrupted and changed and altered and all the rest of this kind of stuff. It just really does give a lie to all of that kind of stuff. So there's what I was going to say. I can't confirm this yet, but I get the distinct feeling that there's sort of a pushback in the Tyndale House Greek New Testament against CBGM, against Munster's use of that methodology in really giving it a lot of weight in making decisions so far in the general epistles and the book of Acts. Those are the parts of what's called the ECM, the Editio Critica Major, actually. The new mega Greek New Testament. I don't know how many volumes it's going to be, but if Acts was 4 volumes and the general epistles were 2 volumes, you can sort of figure out from there. Each of the Gospels, I'm going to predict, is going to be a minimum of 2 volumes, maybe 3 a piece. And then Paul, oh, good grief. Who knows? And Revelation, I don't know. That could end up being this big or that big. It's hard to say, because the text of Revelation, you really, honestly, could separate that out as its own field of study. I mean, I don't have it in here anymore. I used to have behind me the complete collation, at least, of the manuscripts that existed then, of the entirety of the book of Revelation. It took someone over 30 years to do it. Now it's just one book. It's a completely different history than the rest of the New Testament. I mean, just the book of Revelation had a completely different transmission history to it. And you might say, why are you telling me this? Well, if we don't do it in the context of faith, when you get hit with that from the context of unbelief, it can be twisted. And in light of the internet, you've got to understand there are sharp opponents of the faith that will grab anything. And if you don't have a background, if you don't have a foundation, they will grab anything to throw at you, and taken out of its context, saying, well, you don't really know what the book of Revelation said. I mean, so few manuscripts in the first 900 years of the book of Revelation in comparison to, most of our people never hear that. And I realize most of our people don't necessarily need to hear that, but those who, I think fathers who want to prepare their sons and daughters for going into the university setting and things like that, I think there's every reason to prepare yourself on the highest level to be able to communicate these things to others. And so I think it's important. So there's a little bit of stuff about the Tyndale House